The purpose of the British Legacy Bill was to grant amnesty to those who had killed innocent civilians. Now, there appears to be a significant contradiction in the position of the Irish Government and the British Government in the new joint framework, which is seeks to replace that. The British Government are briefing that there will be safeguards for British to those who killed innocent civilians. From their perspective. I asked Simon Harris this question. He said that's separate from the joint framework, that the British are looking for their own safeguards in their own legislations. But that separate treatment for British Army veterans would actually undermine a joint framework, would it not? Would it not create a lopsided justice system in the 6 counties? So what I'm asking you here, will that protection for veterans apply for both sides of the conflict? Will the British Secretary of State retain a veto for the disclosure of the role of paid British agents in the Troubles? And will RUC officers that played a significant role in the Troubles, will they be part of the investigative system that's put into place?
Again, they were not negotiated by this government, nor are they part of the joint framework. It's our understanding that the accommodation made for witnesses should apply to all victims equally, whatever particular perspective has been brought to this.
Sorry, Deputy.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Pender, and I have the honor of being the National President of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. It's my honor today to welcome you to another webinar based from our Freedom for Ireland Committee, Special Protections for British Troopers versus Justice for Legacy Victims. The AOH is proud to continue our position as the leading voice for those looking for truth and justice in Ireland. It is my great honor now to turn it over to our chairman of the Freedom for Ireland Committee, British Troopers. Thank you very much for putting this together.
Okay, Akarja, you heard just a few minutes ago that was tape from Peadar Toibin. He is the leader of the Aontú Party. He's also a deputy in the Dáil, framing the issue which we're about to consider. 2 months ago, there was a joint agreement with the Irish government and British government that was to pave the way for legacy justice, legacy truth, after so many years of injustice and British bad faith. Following that, legislation was introduced in November. Everyone was hopeful that the new legislation would allow the victims the justice that they have so richly deserved and fought for so many years. But in the debates which followed, particularly the second reading of the bill in Westminster, a number of things happened. There were announcements, first of all, by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that there would be special protections for British veterans. And the British Veterans Lobby, a number of generals, a SAS Regimental Association, and a number of others have demanded special protections for the former British troopers, not only for them, but protections which would be extended for the Royal Ulster Constabulary and others, which would prohibit investigations where there had been investigations in the past and which immediately triggered fears in the Irish victims that, again, the British government, which has shown so much bad faith in the past, was again going to put roadblocks in the way of achieving justice. We will hear today in the next hour from Mark Kelly. His sister, Carol Ann Kelly, age 12, was shot down by a British trooper with a plastic bullet in May of 1981, a particular emotional time which just followed the death of hunger strikers Bobby Sands and Francis Hughes, and before the death of Patsy O'Hara and Ray McCreesh, in which there's never really been an investigation. He'll talk to you about what happened, as she was accused of being involved in some sort of riot or at one time petrol bomb or something of that nature. We'll hear then from Clare Brown Loughran, whose father, Sean Brown, was abducted and murdered as he attempted to close the GAA facility in Balahi in the north in County Derry. And the efforts that have been made to deny the family the truth about that, which are now they're due for, there's been an appeal on demands from the court that they be given a public inquiry. We'll then go to a legal expert, Christopher Stanley. He's formerly with the British Irish Rights Watch. He's testified in the United States in front of the Helsinki Commission for Congressman Chris Smith, and he is now a legal advisor to Relatives for Justice. And finally, we're going to end up with Peadar Toibin, the man who you just saw in the opening video, who has raised this question about special protections and what they would mean for victims in the Dáil. And he's going to talk about efforts to ensure that the Irish government holds firm on the British government to make them finally keep the pledges of the joint agreement, to make them finally keep the pledges of justice for victims. We're going to begin by go to Belfast and Mark Kelly. Mark, in May of 1981, what happened to your 12-year-old sister, Carol Ann, at a time when you were just a few feet away as an eyewitness? What happened to her?
So myself and some of my friends were kicking a ball about at the top of our street, just where we live.
Mark, in May of 1981. Chris, there's a problem. There's some kind of repetition. Carol Ann, at a time when you were just a few feet away as an eyewitness. What happened? Okay, Mark, sorry for that. We had just had a technical. Go ahead.
So it was on the 19th of May. So myself and some of my friends were kicking a ball about the street. The school had been taken over by the British Army because the next day there was going to be an election to be held. About 9:05, kicking the ball about, the next thing we see 2 Saracens and 2 army jeeps coming into the estate.
Chris, we're getting repetition again. Is there a way to correct that?
The school had been taken over by the British Army because
I'm not getting it on my end, so
what we're doing is we're hearing everything that is said just after a slight pause. Just it's a repetition what he said earlier.
can you check that you don't have the web page open as well?
What's the red page?
The web page.
Web page, sorry.
I don't know where you've all gone.
I'm gonna mute everyone except for Martin and Mark.
Okay. Mark, go ahead. Sorry for that.
It's okay. So about 9:10, we seen some British Army Land Rovers and APCs, Army personnel carriers, coming into the estate. Obviously, that time of the evening, they were coming in pretty fast. We wanted to know what was going on for young people, you know. Still getting that. 9:10, we seen some British Army Land Rovers and APCs, Army.
Do you want me to click out again and come back in, or what should we do, Chris?
Chris has disappeared.
Yeah. Martin, you're hearing double? Or
yeah, what happens is we speak and then just a slight pause and then it'll continue, it'll repeat what was just said.
It's all coming.
I think if everybody mutes other than the speaker, it may not play.
Yeah, I'm getting it as well myself. After maybe 10 seconds, it starts to repeat again what I'm saying, and I'm getting it through here. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong.
Why don't we try this, Mark? Why don't you exit and then re-enter, and maybe we'll go to the next speaker, move up one, and just this way. Sometimes if you go out, it kind of resets it, and then you can come back in. But you need to exit and then re-enter.
So if I just press leave and then rejoin,
yeah, and then follow the link again.
We'll try that. Okay.
I'm happy to address the legal framework if you want at this point.
Well, we can go to Clare first and then go to the legal points. That's because we wanted you to follow up on what Clare and Mark had said. Clare, can we go to you? All right, Clare, your father, we go from 1981 to 1997. Your father was a GAA official in Balahi. Just what happened to him? Just as he's going out just to lock up the GAA facility in Balahi, and this is shortly after Unionists were gravely disappointed in that a DUP candidate, the Reverend Willie McRae, was defeated by Martin McGuinness.
Yeah, so thanks very much, first of all, for inviting me along today to speak about Daddy. So my father, Sean Brown, was a 61-year-old engineering instructor. He was a Catholic, very much a community-orientated man. He was the chairperson and had been for a number of years of our local Gaelic football club. He was very heavily involved in community and organising lots of cross-community events. In the sort of preceding months, there were, if anybody remembers back to the sort of the mid to late 90s, there was Drumcree and also parades disputes in Balahi. So there was probably a little bit of ill feeling or a wee bit of an undercurrent of the Protestant community feeling that they possibly maybe were being sidelined or something like along those lines. So Daddy then was locking up the gates of our Gaelic football club, and it was quite late at night. It was after a meeting. There was a very regular routine in that the meeting was every Monday night. As he was locking up the gates, he was abducted, we think, by up to 3 people, possibly more. He was, we think, possibly knocked out at that stage, put into the back of his own car, and a convoy of 3 cars, including his own, then made their way about 6 or 8 miles to Tuam, or just outside Randallstown, which is across the border in County Antrim. And there he was dragged from the boot of his car and he was shot 6 times in the head. The car was then set on alight, and then really from there our world fell apart as news broke very early the next morning then that Daddy had been murdered.
Now, your family, your mother, your sister, and your mother had been fighting for justice ever since 1997, and you were actually able to get a new inquest. And in that inquest, something startling happened. A gist or a summary of the intelligence was given by the coroner, who told you that up to 25 people were involved in the murder and that multiple British agents, paid British agents, were involved in the killing. And that at that point, coroner said he could not continue legally. He couldn't give the information which was necessary for a decision, and directed that there be a public inquiry. What has happened? You've also gone to court, and that direction was upheld. What happened with the demand or direction for a public inquiry that you got from the coroner first and then from the Belfast Court of Appeals?
Yeah, so we've now had 5 High Court judges saying that the only true way of getting a human rights compliant investigation into Daddy's murder is a public inquiry. There were 6 public interest immunity certificates applied for, 3 from MI5, 2 from the Crown, or I suppose you could say the MOD, and then 1 from the PSNI. So I suppose one of our biggest questions was why the murder of a Catholic family man in South Derry. Why was there all this public interest immunity certificates applied on behalf of all the Crown forces and behalf of the Crown and behalf of the MI5? So essentially there's lots of sensitive information that has been redacted, and we weren't able to access that sensitive information, and that's basically why our inquest was closed down. So then it moved along. As you're aware, obviously, it went to the appeal court. The appeal court upheld the decision that a public inquiry is the only way to give a human rights compliant investigation into Daddy's murder. And yet again, Hilary Benn, Secretary of State, he applied to the Supreme Court to appeal against that judicial ruling. So we're at the stage now where he has said, look, it's a matter of legal principle. The government seem to be picking and choosing which rulings that they comply with and which rulings they don't comply with. I mean, they're subject to the authority as much as everybody else, but we're sitting now waiting essentially on a date for the Supreme Court to hear his appeal.
Yes, the Hilary Benn, the British Secretary, expressed sympathy for your mother and how long she's had to wait for justice, and then took the steps to deny justice by saying you had to go to the London Supreme Court, where the British hope to get a more favorable, a home court advantage rather than the Belfast High Court. Have you gotten any information on when you're supposed to go to London, when your case will be held?
We have been told that it is potentially at the start of the 2026, so maybe in around about February, March time. I mean, there's no guarantee that that is the case. Mummy is 88. She'll be going in next year into her 89th year. And at this stage now, how much longer are they going to delay this? That's the thing. So even if the Supreme Court do hear this, and there's no guarantee that they will actually hear the appeal, we are led to believe there's a possibility they actually could really throw the appeal out from Hillyben. But you're correct in saying that they're going to potentially maybe a little bit more favourable court in the Supreme Court. We obviously would have to try and travel to London. And my mother has attended so many court dates, and it would be a real disappointment to her if she wasn't able to attend that one. But she has got mobility issues, and that would be a very, very difficult thing for her to do. And she appealed directly to Hilary-Benn to ask him not to take her to London to do the right thing. And he has ignored her in every turnaround. So I'm sorry, I think time for sympathy is over.
All right. Now, there's two things that are very concerning. Number one of the startling things in your case was that the coroner gave a gist, which is just a simple summary of what he'd gotten from intelligence and documents, and just said that there were multiple British agents involved, as well as how many people they thought were involved. After that, Hilary-Benn, the British secretary that you mentioned, brought a legal action to prevent gists from being introduced, including one in the Thompson case, in which the John Boucher, the chief constable, PSNI chief constable, had agreed on the wording, said it was not a compromise, in any way compromised British security. He's appealing that, doing that again. And number two, there were a number of things that happened, such as surveillance being taken off somebody who was involved or believed to be involved in your father's assassination. There were a number of things that seemed to indicate that a very high level within British forces, within the Royal Ulster Constabulary, must have been involved in, been aware of agents involved in the agents' activities. And Peter Sheridan was an assistant chief constable at that time, would have had some degree of responsibility in terms of collusion. He now is the chief investigator for the ICRIR. How do you feel about those things? Number one, the fact that Hilary-Benn is moving to prevent disclosure, a gist even, for anyone else. And number two, the fact that there are high-ranking members of the RUC must have had some kind of inkling, must have had some kind of oversight in terms of agents' involvement at this type, and yet they are supervisors who were given positions involving legacy justice.
Yeah, Martin, it means that it brings about a real mistrust of the legacy framework and how the government are dealing with it. Why is the Secretary of State the only one that's allowed to make those disclosure decisions? Why is it completely up to him? Why is there no other independent mechanism to do that? The Commission is the only one that can actually appeal those disclosure decisions. And as you say rightly there, if you've got Peter Sheridan, who was involved at that particular time in the RUC and as a high-ranking member of the RUC, is he really going to be the one then that's going to ask for further disclosures and potentially expose some of his colleagues that would have been involved in running agents? And as you say, there are 25 suspects, and several of those are state agents involved in Daddy's murder. And you can see that because of the amount of redactions, the amount of sensitive information is around Daddy's case, and the amount of sensitive information that they are withholding from us. It really makes it then that we are very untrusting of the process and very untrusting of the of this framework. We need, the family need to be involved. We need that legal representation. We need to have that ability to have that human rights investigation. And so far, from those things that you have said, the veto that the Secretary of State has, and then also the fact that we have people who were involved at that particular time whenever Daddy was murdered and several other people were murdered, involved now in reinvestigating this. How do we trust that this will be independent? I really can't say that.
Okay, we're going to try. Is Mark Kelly back? Chris? Sorry, I see you, Mark. Mark, we had asked you, May 1981, 2 hunger strikers had died, including Bobby Sands and Twinbrook in your area. You're talking about your sister Caroline, then 12 years old, Carol Ann, then 12 years old, coming back from a shop with milk, What happened to her, and why is it that you feel you've never been given an investigation into that murder?
So obviously we were out playing in the street. It was a lot of kids, a lot of maybe 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds around the streets. Beautiful evening. It was an absolutely beautiful evening. The army came into the estate, and as kids, you're looking to see what's going on, what are they doing. Coming into the estate at that time, they were generally going to kick someone's door in and search their house, and you wanted to see what was happening. We came down towards the front of the house. Caroline had actually run past me as I was kicking the ball about with my friends. Came down the front of the house, the front of our own house, to see what was happening, where the army were going. And we heard a shot. I know Caroline heard the first shot, so they fired the first shot at some friends of mine who were up the street behind me, still kicking the ball. Caroline turned to come back towards me, and the second shot hit her, and she was killed. I mean, she wasn't pronounced dead until the 22nd, but thankfully, being so close to her, I know that she didn't suffer, and she was killed outright there and then on the spot.
How old were you at that time?
I was 13. I was a year older than Caroline.
All right.
In fact, it had been Caroline's birthday on the 8th of May, so she had just turned 12 years.
All right. Now, somebody went in, nobody came out to interview you or any of the eyewitnesses at that time, but I believe a neighbor went in to make a report to see if there could be an investigation, went into the barracks the next day. What happened to that request?
Well, that evening, the police officer, there was a police officer put in charge of the investigations. I 13 didn't really know a lot about this and stuff I'm reading from inquest and speaking to people, but a lady who lived next door to us was called Marie Toner, who had actually been married to a British soldier and moved. They got separated. She moved to Belfast, didn't want to have anything to do with him, stayed in Belfast, and she went to make a statement. They come out, the police come out to the house. Firstly, she was threatened if she made a statement, she would, with other witnesses, that she would be arrested and charged with riotous behaviour because she was there. But when she was in the police station, RUC officers come out and they actually fired plastic bullets through our windows at us, the rest of the kids in the house, and her house, which was next door. So again, the harassment just started immediately, like it was immediate. So it was. Why do I think that we weren't questioned or spoken to? I think because it's very difficult if you're questioning 11, 12 and 13-year-olds for them to tell you lies.
Okay.
So I think those statements would have been very strong in the court case if it ever arose.
All right. There were inquests. What did they say? What was written about Carol Ann to justify the killing?
Well, the guy that actually shot Caroline, a Fusilier, Barry Scott, you called him. He was the one that fired the bullet to kill Caroline. He wasn't in the coroner's court at all. He never turned up, although some soldiers did turn up. Our solicitor, Oliver Kelly, at the time was asking questions of the soldiers, and the coroner stopped him asking questions. He says, "This is not a court case. We're here to establish how Caroline died." Of course, we knew how Caroline died. She was shot. So there was no real questions. There was harassment from the soldiers against other members of my family. So at the first inquest hearing was held a year later on the 7th of May, the day before Caroline's birthday. It was postponed until the 21st of May, the day before Caroline died, actually said that she had died. So, I mean, it was just the way they treated our family, my mother especially, and my sisters and stuff. It's just horrendous. There's zero justice and zero looking for justice at all. Like, they have no interest.
There was later a historical inquiries team investigation. Now, the historical inquiries team was actually disbanded because a British inspectorate saw that they gave favor anything done by members of the British Crown Forces. They got special favorable treatment. Is there any real investigation? Why is it that you're fighting for an investigation into Carol Ann's death so many years later?
Because there was no real investigation. They spoke to that lady, Marie Toner. She was the only person that they spoke to that actually seen what happened. She was standing at her front door. They spoke to another lady who wasn't. She seen the soldiers coming in the top of the estate, so she really seen nothing. John Boyd was another man that they spoke to. He was a guy that came out of the house after the shooting and tried to help give first aid. As I say, I was never spoke to. None of my friends were ever spoke to. The people who were spoke to were threatened. They attacked our house with plastic bullets after this. The coroner actually says that Caroline was an innocent child in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was at the front door of her own house. But the investigation was just, there was none. The police officer, Detective Constable McCulloch, says that he couldn't investigate the case properly because the area was too dangerous to have an investigation. Now, that just remind people, this is a housing estate with 10,000 people living in it. You know, so I don't know how it could be so dangerous they couldn't come and investigate the murder of a child.
Right. And one of the things that's been brought up as a special protection for former British troopers is that if there's been a prior investigation, that there be no more successive investigations. You've had a coroner just a short time after the killing. You had this HAT report. Why is it that if you heard that Carol Ann, it was not going to be an investigation because of these prior investigations, how would you regard that?
Well, for me, obviously standing beside Caroline when she was shot and knowing exactly what happened and seeing the amount of lies that was told, and I know that there was no proper investigation. I have never been spoken to by the police, and neither have some of my friends who were there that evening. So they did basically what they had to do. And also another thing, Martin, when in the coroner's court, the coroner actually said that the British soldier legally fired his weapon because Caroline was with two of her friends, and in the north of Ireland at that time, 3 people constituted a riot squad. You know, so just reason after reason, and none of it makes sense, you know.
So a 12-year-old girl coming back from a shop with milk with 2 friends, that constitutes a riot at that time? It justifies shooting. Is that
that's exactly what the coroner said. That's
okay.
Exactly what he said.
All right. Next, we're going to go to Christopher Stanley, who is a legal expert. He's worked with British Irish Rights Watch. He's worked with Kevin Winter's law firm and now works for Relatives for Justice. Christopher, what are your concerns? You've heard the concerns that Mark Kelly and Clare Brown Loughran have. What are your concerns about the new legislation, particularly after it's introduced and we hear appeals from a number of British generals, from the SAS Regimental Association, from other British veterans, and these are echoed by members of the Democratic Unionist Party and the official Unionist Party, and a number of amendments have been tabled already in Westminster to be attached to this legislation. So what are your concerns as a legal expert?
Okay, I'll break that down into 2 parts. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak as an English lawyer, first to the AOH. Secondly, our Relatives for Justice, and I've done a clause-by-clause analysis of the bill. The bill fails in terms of not being international. It doesn't comply with international investigations followed by state-sponsored killings. It is not European Convention compliant, which is part of the commitment of the joint framework. And as you know, the ECHR is part of the commitment of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement 1998. So it's not compliant. It's not in the spirit and letter of the joint framework, and it's certainly not in the spirit and letter, again, of the 1998 agreement. And in terms of its relationship to the Legacy Act, on which we're still waiting a judgment in the Martina Dillon appeal before the Supreme Court, of which there is no date. It's a bit like shifting the deck chairs on a Titanic. Our basic headline points before I get onto the veterans issue, about the bill is, and it echoes what Clare said, is A, information retrieval, information recovery is key to truth and accountability for relatives and victims and survivors of the conflict. That's what they want, information. Any control over information and the disclosure information, as in the Sean Brown killing, any denial of that, or any executive power over that, A, is going to interfere with that truth-seeking process and it undermine the credibility of any agency charged with disclosure. So in the bill, we have clear, sensitive material, sensitive information, national security concerns being controlled by the Secretary of State, a member of the executive, And as you know, in any democracy, members of the executive come and go, and it's civil servants and it's members in senior administrative positions, including members of security services and the British military, who control the access and interpretation of information to ministers and ministers of the executive. That's exactly the same. It's replicated in the Troubles Bill. Secondly, it's about the actual appointment, and we've mentioned this in relation to Peter Sheridan, ex-senior RUC Special Branch Officer, and the same as the former Gardner Commissioner, Drew Harris, who's just left, as in terms of the appointment of people who are going to do investigations. And again, these are executive appointments. Yes, the bill does have caveats that the Secretary of State may take guidance and may have a panel and does have to have cognizance of conflicts of interest. But it's not independent. It's not independent domestically, and it's not independent internationally. So again, it fails in terms of ECHR compliance. And there are various other failures in the bill, which I could go into detail. On the veterans issue, the word veteran isn't mentioned in the bill. The word veteran is not mentioned in the joint framework. The word veteran is mentioned in the accompanying statement of the Secretary of State on the same day, I think, the 16th of September. Yes. And it dominates the discussion in the House of Commons on the 17th of November on the second reading, which was the first substantive debate over the bill. And most of the debate was about veterans, because veterans were in the gallery and the generals had written their letter to the London Times about the persecution and the punitive prosecutions of veterans, and the so-called special protections. Well, veterans aren't mentioned in the bill, and the only protections are to treat witnesses with care. And I think it's clause 33 of the bill, which says about treating witnesses. Now, we don't even have a definition of veteran. We have the prosecution of soldier F in relation to Bloody Sunday. We have different types of veterans here. Does the definition of veteran, and this has been mentioned at all, I know, include state agents, informers, members of security, for any operative of the British security forces during the course of the conflict, including MI5, MI6, British military intelligence? And it gets very murky when you're looking at agencies like the MRF, through and so forth, and those coalitions of agents and informers operative throughout the course of the conflict, largely as a result of the Kitson experiment. How far does this go, and does it include RUC Special Branch? Are they going to be protected? Now, the protections we talk about apply within the frameworks being proposed by the bill and the Legacy Commission. They cannot apply within the criminal justice system. And if you have a standing military force, one of the roles of that standing military force is to protect the democratic principles of the nation you're employed to do, which includes the rule of law. Veterans cannot be stood outside the rule of law or be given special privileges about anybody else who's committed a criminal offence. And just one final point, Martin, before I stop, is that there are certain veterans who actually stand outside this and have written to the Times in opposition to the position. But I think it's the power of that lobby, it's the power of the security service lobby, yes. And we've seen this in London this week in relation to the actions of the SAS in Afghanistan, which are getting very horrific, are basically bordering on war crimes. And it's the fear about disclosure information, and it's the extent of thematic, and this is another part of the bill. There's no provision in the bill for any thematic investigation into a concept like collusion over the course of 40, 50 years of the conflict, and the exposure that will not come to force. That's my concern about veterans and the bill in general.
All right, I just want to zero in just very briefly on a couple of the points that you've raised. Number one, in terms of a veto on disclosure, the decision is made, the ultimate decision is made by the British Secretary. That's Hilary Benn. He's supposed to consider certain factors, but these are not binding. He makes his own decision. He is somebody who has gone to court to block disclosures that have been approved by the Chief Constable of the PSNI, John Boucher, which John Boucher has said the bill doesn't go far enough. How much confidence do you have that in a case like Clare Brown, Loughran's father, that a British secretary like Hilary Benn would allow disclosure about the conduct and involvement of British agents?
I think in the way it's disclosed, he will not be facilitated in providing that disclosure. He will probably not be given that disclosure. He's simply a politician. If the front bench fails next week, we could have a new Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. They come and go. Director Generals of Security Forces, military intelligence operatives are long-term employed officials of the state. They're not going to give elected politicians access or even provide a gist. And just in relation to the Thompson case, which you mentioned, including neither confirmed or denied, Boucher, when he was head of Operation Canova, was very clear that it's not historic to relatives and society. These are not historic, but this is historic operational material, which even Boucher said, neither confirm, deny, you can have a blanket policy in that. And that, at the point of the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, is when the MI5, MI6 and military intelligence decided to intervene in the Thompson case and were allowed to intervene. Yeah. And the appeal process against the decision of the Secretary of State will be by way of judicial review, which is exactly what the family of Sean Brown are engaged in now before the Supreme Court. And judicial review is a useful mechanism to hold the state to account. But judicial review in the UK, and neither confirmed or denied for your members in America, is like the Gloma Doctrine, basically, I think it's called in America. Judicial review can only review the decision taken and the mechanisms of that decision. It can't replace that decision with an independent decision by the judiciary. It can only send back to the Secretary of State, please make this decision again. At which point the Secretary of State may actually amend the law again to make it even tighter.
All right. Again, another thing is the appointments. We've already talked about Mr. Sheridan, top assistant chief constable, very high-ranking member of the RUC during the time when collusion has taken place, must have had some kind of responsibility to investigate, to stand over, to investigate killings like that of Sean Brown's, and been aware of the role of agents involved, but nobody gets arrested. The British secretary must consult or question a panel, but he's not bound by the decision. Is there anything to block him from appointing the very people who were involved in collusion, who oversaw collusion during the Troubles, and now would have an interest in ensuring that it's not made public now?
Only his fear of public condemnation and nobody engaging with the process which he's trying to impose, which is exactly the situation we have now with the ICR, with the ICRIR. But nobody has confidence that now that will fail. And if he does continue with that without rigorous safeguards, without independent oversight mechanisms, yes, I'm not saying that policemen aren't good investigators. That's what they're paid for. One of the successes of Operation Canova is it's by and large has nothing to do with anybody who's ever worked in Northern Ireland. Yeah. Operation Canova is by and large staffed by Met officers. I have no great faith in the London Metropolitan Police, being a citizen of the City of London, but it's a completely independent police force. What you need is oversight mechanisms and rigorous conflict of interest provisions and an international perspective, which is what the international standards of investigation require.
All right. And finally, one of the first things they talk about with special protections is preventing there from being investigations where matters were previously investigated. You've heard about Mark Kelly, what happened with the investigation, which amounts to no investigation of the murder of his 12-year-old sister. Is there anything to prevent that? Will that mean that things like the Widgery Tribunal, that the coroners, that other things of that nature, which were clearly illegal it did not satisfy the requirements of the European Convention on Human Rights. Is there anything within the law that would prevent those investigations being blocked on those terms, saying they were a prior investigation?
If there's been state-sponsored killing, and there's been no Article 2 compliant investigation, even on a historical basis, there are jurisdictional temporal points, but the first investigation, for example, Ballymurphy is a good example, Bloody Sunday, the examples you've given, they're good examples where the RMP come in, give a standard interviews to serving soldiers, one piece of paper. Mark gave the example of the inquest. They're the standard investigations. They have been blown apart by the judiciary. The judiciary have said, in Kathleen Thompson's case, these were not adequate standard investigations, either by contemporary domestic standards or by international ECHR standards. And the Chief Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission for Northern Ireland, Alison Kilpatrick, a few weeks ago before the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, said exactly the same point. You cannot stop repeat investigations if there's been no human rights compliant investigation. You can't legislate for that, because that would again be in breach, and that was a challenge point which takes you back into the realms of the court and the oversight of the independent judiciary.
Okay, we're next going to go to Peadar Toibin. Peadar, We played tape of you questioning the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, in the Dáil, specifically about the Legacy Act, about special protections for British veterans, how they would undermine the whole purpose of the whole objective of the act and deny truth to victims. Just what are the efforts? What are your concerns as a member of the Dáil representing? You've heard the concerns that Clare, Brown, Loughran, and Mark Kelly have. What are your feelings in terms of making sure that the Irish government insists that the British comply with the agreement that they made and finally give justice to these victims' relatives?
Yeah, Gurmila Mahagat, for having us on. I appreciate it. First of all, I suppose there was some level of welcome initially to the joint framework when it was announced, because obviously the British Legacy Bill was basically seen as an amnesty to allow people to just get away with murder. It was seen as the son and heir of the original collusion and cover-up that happened in the north of Ireland. And obviously, it was an example of Britain operating as a rogue state outside of the rule of law. So initially, there was a welcome given to the announcement of the joint framework document. I will say that we as a party have been drenched with caution around it for exactly the reasons that have been outlined here. The fact that the current regime themselves have been active in trying to prevent justice and disclosure happening within the system. And the fact on the day, literally, the joint framework document was announced, there already started to be a separation between the two governments in terms of what was going to happen. And I want to say at this point as well that there's no doubt in my mind that a lot of the pressure that has come on the British government and a lot of the pressure that's come on the Irish government has happened as a result of work done by ourselves in the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And that has definitely contributed to shifting the Irish government to take a stronger line against the British government. But within a couple of days of the announcement, the British government started to talk about safeguards for British Army veterans. So Aintu asked on the floor of the Dáil and by a form of written question, what exactly did this mean? And was it part of initial discussions with the Irish government? And they stated, the Irish government stated quite clearly that these so-called protections for British Army veterans were not part of any bilateral negotiations or discussions at all. So I asked then, secondly then, was it likely then that this was going to be a lopsided agreement so that arrangements or protections would be provided to one side of the Troubles and not to the other? And the government has been, the Irish government have been pretty weak in these terms. In their responses, they have stated that it's their understanding that if there are to be protections, that it will be applied equally. However, they haven't been able to give guarantees in relation to that. The Irish government are of the view that some of those protections would be minor in nature. There might be in terms of if a veteran is old or incapacitated, the getting information or testimony from them might be facilitated in ways such as maybe Zoom or technical ways. However, there's great worry and stress that actually those protections mean more. And given the advice that we've just received here, also there's been caution around what role the British Secretary of State would play in being able to block investigations. And it's very clear from the information that we've just received there that the British Secretary of State remains central in terms of the flow of information and the ability for people to access the truth here. We've also put questions to the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach in terms of what roles former members of the RUC would play in this. And again, the government have been very, very weak in the South in relation to this, unfortunately. The government has, politically speaking, they've put all their chips on this particular agreement as breaking the deadlock that has existed in terms of truth and recovery. However, it is my view that that is not likely to be the case given the current legislation. and also given the current the amendments that are before that legislation. And you got to remember that the British Army has a significant lobbying effect on the political system in Britain, and many of the print media, for example, are very supportive of that. And some of those MPs also have significant chunks of their constituencies populated by people either who are British soldiers or are veterans, and that doesn't even talk about the fact that the British security state is very much the permanent government in the system as well, looking after its own interests and seeking to prevent information coming out about bad actions that have happened in the past.
Okay, we're just going to turn in a second to give everybody a chance for final comments. You are correct. Initially, special protections were announced. Initially, it was talked about, well, maybe it would be older people not having to travel to Ireland. They could give testimony by Zoom. But then as soon as the discussions, the debate started in Westminster, they're talking about no investigations if there have been prior investigations. They're talking about extending an amnesty, giving an amnesty, bringing it back even though it's been declared illegal, and extending it to members of the RUC and others. And we appreciate your efforts in the Dáil to ensure that the Irish government, first of all, that it doesn't drop the case that it now has in the European Court, which could be crucial. And number two, that it brings maximum amount of pressure to have the British government do what they so seldom, if ever, have done in Irish history, live up to an agreement they made with the Irish. All right, we're going to turn now. We're going to go first to Mark Kelly. Mark, is there anything else that you want to say before we close?
Yes, Martin, I want to just go back on what you said there. It's very, very important the Irish government do not drop this case. It is the only way that I can see that anyone is ever going to get justice. I'd also make it clear that this special protection is amnesty under a different name. And the last thing, I've heard them saying many times that it's witch hunts. But what the families are asking for is they're asking that a British police force will investigate a British soldier to see if there's any evidence to bring them in front of a British judge with a British jury in a British court. That's not a witch hunt. That is the looking for justice. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Next, go to Clare Brown Loughran. Clare, anything final statements before we close out?
Just on one point that Christopher had made there about the special protections. It seems now at this stage, very much in our case, although we didn't have Crown forces actually murder Daddy, but there did seem to be very heavily involvement as they ran agents, and it's now been proven in the gist that we received from the inquest. So yeah, it's a very good point. Special protections seem to be now also being given, particularly in our case, to those agents. It's not just the Crown forces. It is actually seems to be spreading a wider net than that.
Not only that, you don't know who gave orders, who directed people, who said that Mark Haddock, one of the agents involved with special surveillance of him, would be ended for a 12-hour or 24-hour period. This obviously was done at a very high level, but those are things that were not released to you and your solicitors and your family under British security view, the same type of thing that they're using. All right, next we're going to go back to Christopher Stanley. Christopher, any final thoughts?
Just picking up very quickly, first point would be that obviously disclosure information is key to putting together files for prosecution. And the higher the threshold you make for prosecution decisions, the more difficult it will be to actually deliver criminal justice solutions. I'm not saying criminal justice solutions are the solution to every conflict-related death or injury, but they are part of, and they have to be a hard justice solution if there's been serious systemic criminality. Secondly, I would like a commitment. Well, I would like a commitment. I think the application made by Ireland against the UK to the Strasbourg Court, to the European Court of Human Rights, is extant. It is live. It has not been removed by the Irish government, as far as I know. I don't know what the internal politics of the DFA are at this point, or within the Taoiseach's office, or where that fits into the joint agreement as a leverage point. But it remains a leverage point because Ireland versus UK number 2, which is what it would basically be, is an important draconian sword over the British government, even though there are elements of the British political establishment that wants to delink itself from the ECHR. That's a complicated messy project, basically, as complicated as Brexit, to mix stuff up. So I think the prosecution threshold is key, and the information system does not help prosecutors here. And secondly, the Irish government's commitment to maintaining its stance, because on Friday, the Committee of Ministers, which oversees the McCurr group of governments, said, yes, the Troubles Bill is an advancement, but it doesn't go far enough. We're not going to stop supervising the implementation of the McCurr group of cases from 2000. And the Irish commitment to that challenge should remain extant.
Okay. We're next going to go to Peadar Toibin, and we should mention Peadar is actually going to be in the U.S. On, I believe it's January 24th for the Right to Life March. Sean Pender will correct me if I have the date wrong. So Peadar Talks is very good in terms of legacy and Irish national issues as well as the right to life issue. Peadar, any final thoughts?
Yeah, and we'll be in New York on the Saturday as well. We'll have a public meeting to update people in relation to what's happening in Ireland at the moment. Yeah, just to say to Christopher, thankfully that challenge to the British in the European Court of Human Rights is still in existence, and it is a significant point of leverage. And I do think actually, given the direction of travel of the legislation and the political evolution of the bill in Britain at the moment, this is now becoming a very serious point of crisis between the Irish government and the British government, and it's the responsibility of individuals like myself. I'm on the Good Friday Agreement Implementation Committee as well, so we'll be bringing it to that committee to actually try to push as much as we can and to put the brakes in the wrong direction that this is going on in the next while. And just to say to the AOH to keep up the good work and keeping the pressure on as well.
All right. When the framework, the joint agreement was announced, there was a great deal, there was a cautious welcome, a guarded welcome was certainly given to the bill. But during the meetings, Simon Harris was here in the United States. There was a select group in New York. I was one of the representatives of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. And I said, this sounds fine the way that you're describing it, but I've had 45 years of perfidious alba, and I expect them to try and break, twist, manipulate agreements, to do what they've done for so many years, which is to deny justice to people like Mark Kelly about his sister, to people like Clare Brown Loughran about her father, to so many families. If the British were going to act in good faith on this issue, they would have done so. We could have expected to get the truth and justice for these families long ago. So I'm going to encourage everybody. We're here, the Ancient Order of Hibernians. Irish America has to stay on top. You've heard from the victims. You've heard about how much they've had to go through to get justice. You've heard from people like Peadar Toibin talking about the pressure in the Dáil. Irish America has to be a key part of that pressure on the Irish government. Make the British do what they so seldom, if ever, do. Keep this agreement, or else take them and pursue them in the European Convention, the European Court on Human Rights. And for our final words, our national president, our leader, Sean Pender.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for putting your hard work and dedication to this subject. And I want to thank, Peadar and Chris for joining us, but especially Mark and Clare. What this always comes back to is the human aspect of that. And to hear that Mark's 12-year-old sister, because she was with 3 people, that could be talked about rioting. In 1981, I mean, they stole a life there. Imagine what that Carol Ann could have been as a 56-year-old woman, full of life, love, and family. And Sean Brown, by all respects, was a well-respected man in his community, with the GAA and, of course, his family. Stolen from his family, a man who should have been able to enjoy the fruits of his labor for life with his family. Instead, the British government wants to make his 89-year-old widow continually to travel. It tells you all you need to know about the British government and the cover-up they continue to do over this. But it tells us why it's important that we need to be able to challenge military, and we need to be able to challenge government, regardless of where they are in the world, when they tell us something that just doesn't make sense. And that's why it's so important, first and foremost, for the victims to stand up and that we support them and their survivors. But then brave people like lawyers like Chris Stanley stand up, and Peadar Toibin, elected officials, stand up, and groups like Relatives for Justice stand up, and groups like the AOH stand up, and to say this is not right. And just because you have the power as a government or a military, there's one thing you don't have. You don't have the truth. That's always been on our side. And that's what we always have to do. In the long run, it's been a long, long run, but we need to stay together, support the victims, support those who support the victims, and continue to hold the feet to the fire of the British government, the British military, and to make sure that the Irish government continues their good work, but making sure that case in Europe continues. So again, as we close this, I want to thank you all for coming. It's a great, great work. We stand with you. We will never abandon you. My best wishes to all.
Sean, just, sorry, I should have added, number one, this is now going to be on AOH YouTube. So if you know people, if you've seen this webinar, recommend it to others who might be interested. And number two, we want to give Sean, myself, Bob, we all want to give a special shout out to Mark Thompson. His mother is ill. She's in the hospital. He worked very hard on contacting everybody to help put this together. So we appreciate that. Okay, again, we're going to be with you in the days and weeks to come. Son.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night. God bless.
Thanks so much.